You'll be making some permanent decisions right at the start of Dragon Age Veilguard, and while you can respec your character's combat skills at any time, you cannot change your class or faction. But after playing the full game, I'm going to be giving you a spoiler-free overview of how the factions affect the gameplay, and also the playstyle of each class, the rogue, mage, and warrior, so you can decide what's going to be the best one to play for you. For example, I usually find mages really boring to play, but in this game, they're actually hella fun. Each class skill tree is also broken up into 3 quadrants, with sustain, burst, and control abilities. And every class also has 3 different specializations unlocked at level 20, which I'll be breaking down in this video too, so you have an idea of what the end game gameplay is going to be like. Really, there's been a lot of changes from past Dragon Age titles, but thankfully EA has sent me the full game early on so I could make this video. So thank you EA for sponsoring it. Let's start out with the mage class, unless you're playing a dwarf, because dwarfs can't use magic. They do have nice beards though. Anyway, the mage is the most agile class in the game. You're going to be teleporting around, slinging elemental spells with your staff before darting into close range combat, where you can swap to your new orb and dagger weapon. Let's go over the weapons first so you understand how they work and combo together. Starting out with the staff weapon, you can block both ranged and melee attacks with the ward shield. Each time it gets hit though, you'll lose mana instead of health. You can see our mana bar at the bottom of the screen here. You can carry on blocking attacks until the shield turns red, and then you'll get knocked over. Alternatively, you can just dodge instead. Now, the mage's staff has a basic ranged attack which can be spammed. The third attack unleashes 3 bolts instead of 1. And since we're using a necrotic staff, all the staff attacks deal necrotic damage. Now, if you actually hold down the light attack button, you get a more powerful light attack. Alternatively, you have the staff power attack, which fires a cone area of effect in front of you. But if you hold down the power attack button, you'll actually be able to use your mana reserves to charge up your staff. This is then going to empower your next power attack for even bigger conal damage. Or if you power attack while sprinting, you get another animation where you basically do a massive ground pound area of effect. And remember that power attacks are going to deal more damage to enemies that have a yellow armored health bar. The final attack the staff has is the elemental channel ability, which turns it into a laser beam of death. And this is going to do additional damage to blue shielded enemies, but it will cost mana to use this ability. Now, the next weapon choice the mage can swap to is the dagger and orb. And just like the staff, the orb weapon is also elemental. It can deal very short range damage with light attacks, which can also be held down for more damage. And you can also channel the orb's elemental ability as well, just like the staff. The enemies hit with the orb get an arcane mark, and with 3 stacks of it, it turns into an arcane bomb, which you can see above the enemy's head. That bomb can then be detonated by hitting the enemy with your dagger attack. And once triggered, it's going to hit all of the enemies around it, dealing elemental damage. Now, the dagger itself only does physical damage, but its attacks are imbued with the elemental damage from the orb. And unlike the staff, you can actually parry attacks when you're using the dagger, which does require a bit of skill and timing on your part. Now, the real power of the mage comes into play when you start to combo these elemental attacks together. By swapping between the staff to the orb and dagger mid-attack combo, you can start to create your own fighting style. But then as you level up, you'll unlock skill points that you can spend on the mage's skill tree, and you can respec this at any time. Here you're going to find new spells and passives that increase your overall damage or reduce the cooldown of your spells. Now, the mage skill tree is split into 3 different sections: control, burst, and sustain. Firstly, control offers crowd control spells that freeze your targets and slow them down. The burst section is lightning magic, which can jump from enemy to enemy with chain lightning and stack shock effects on them. And then we have sustain, which sets fire to enemies for sustained damage. You can also create a wall of fire on the battlefield. Now, once you're level 20, and the max level is 50 by the way, where you can specialize as either a spellblade, invoker, or death caller. This unlocks a new ultimate and a specialized ability tree. Now, the spellblade focuses on the dagger and orb combo, almost like a lightning assassin. Dealing shock damage with each strike, it's super fast fast and lethal to play. You'll be teleporting in and out with chain lightning ricocheting from enemy to enemy. Then you have the Invoker, which is a gravity-based mage who can summon a vortex to manipulate the battlefield. Think of a staff-wielding control mage, setting up other attacks for your companions to capitalize on. And then you have the Death Caller, which is a necromancer who can absorb the life force of those around him. He also has an option to use health when he runs out of mana, playing on the verge of life and death. Now, before you pick the rogue class in Dragon Age Veilguard, here's what you should know about its playstyle. Because once you take a look at its skill tree, you'll find it's one of the most diverse classes in the game. You can be anything from a fast blur in combat with the dual daggers, and even becoming untargetable at times, to an engineered pirate style rogue that uses traps and cannons, or a dedicated ranger that deals death from afar with critical headshots. But personally, I like to mix it up. Now, rogues can dual wield light weapons like daggers for quick and close range attacks, or they can use a bow to pick off enemies from a distance. Now, the swords can light attack 5 times, with the final strike dealing additional damage. And this is key for building up momentum at the bottom here, which I'll talk more about in a moment. It's also why the rogues deal such good single target damage. Now, if you actually hold down the light attack button, you'll instead rush towards the enemy for an uppercut attack. And if you light attack after jumping, you'll do a downwards plunge. There's also a sprinting attack variation as well. But that's just the light attacks. We also have power attacks. This is a series of free spinning attacks that deal area of effect damage, and they're perfect for dealing with enemies with a yellow armored health bar. Also, if you hold down the power attack, you get a spinning flurry of blades to break through enemy armor. You can also combine this with jumping power attacks and sprinting power attacks too. But when you start weaving together the light and power attack, you'll see just how satisfying the rogue is to play. Now, obviously rogues can't take a lot of hits, they're pretty damn weak. So dodging and quick movements are essential for survival. And the rogue actually has 2 dodge animations, one of which he does a flip in midair. Pretty sure it's not possible to do in real life, but it looks awesome. And of course, you can also parry with the rogue's daggers. And if timed correctly, you can then riposte for even more damage back to the enemy. But our ranged weapon choice is the bow. This weapon is super effective against magically shielding enemies with the blue health bar. And it can deal critical hits with headshots too, making the rogue one of the most effective ranged classes in the entire game. Now, you can either hold down the bow to actually aim your attack, or just tap it for hipfire shots. You can even shoot while you're in midair or in a melee combo of attacks. But once you fully charge the bow, you'll see the reticle flash in the middle for max damage. Some perks and skills though let you charge up the bow even further. Unfortunately though, you don't actually have unlimited arrows in Dragon Age. You start out with 8 shots and they just regenerate over time. To be honest though, if you're playing the class to its full potential, you'll very rarely be running out of arrows, but there are ways of increasing them if you pick up certain perks in the skill tree. But before the rogue can use abilities, he needs to generate enough momentum, which we see at the bottom here. Once he generates enough, he gets a point of adrenaline to use on an ability. So to build up his momentum, you need to keep attacking uninterrupted. Once you have a stack of momentum, you can then use one of your abilities. But what abilities can you use? Well, the rogue skill tree is split up into sustain, burst, and control skills. Some of these are new abilities, some are passives, and others are stat boosts. You can also reset all your skill points at any time as long as you're not in combat. Starting out with sustain, it's going to offer you skills like Pilfer, where you can steal a health potion which is used immediately, where you can stun enemies with lightning or keep your distance with the back leap shot when using a bow. And it will also increase the damage of traps that you can use to zone out the battlefield. Control, on the other hand, is built around using a bow specifically. You can rain down a hail of necrotic arrows or nuke the enemies with an explosive shock arrow. You can also charge up your bow for longer and even fire multiple shots at once into multiple different enemies. But then we get onto the burst damage, which is about dealing as much damage as quick as possible using the daggers. And with Hurricane of Blades, you can destroy everything around you while also being untargetable. Or you can pepper the target with explosive daggers for single target DPS. Many of your abilities also apply armor debuffs, making your normal attack deal even more damage. Now at level 20, the rogues can pick between 2 class specializations, which unlock new skill trees, either the Saboteur, Veil Ranger, or Duelist. Starting with a Saboteur, you're going to be using traps like a deployable turret which attacks nearby enemies that come close. The Saboteur's ultimate is a cannon which barrages the enemy with explosive rounds. And also, all of his arrow abilities will splinter into nearby targets, meaning you're doing AoE damage with your bow. But if you prefer a distance range playstyle, the Veil Ranger is going to be for you. He has a focus on magical ranged attacks, with the Stormpath arrow that hits everything in front of him. He can also slow time when aiming, and his ultimate creates a magical energy that bounces between targets. But my favorite, however, is the Duelist, with a focused on dagger gameplay. 1000 Cuts is a great single target DPS skill that decimates the enemy standing in front of you, while your ultimate makes you completely untargetable while hitting everything in a large area around you for lots of necrotic damage. If you like utilizing adrenaline, this is going to be the specialization for you. But if you have found the video helpful so far, please do leave a like on it, and then we need to talk about the warrior class next. Because the warrior class is normally quite boring to me in most games, but in Dragon Age Veilguard it slaps. You can be a slow-wielding monster with a two-handed weapon, or a wall of defense for your allies, soaking up the onslaught in the heat of battle, and summoning down arrows from the sky, or leeching your enemy's health with necromancy. And interestingly, like Captain America, you can also throw your shield now. And speaking of your equipment, the warrior has access to a one-handed weapon and shield. But you can also light attack with your sword for some consistent damage, and if you hold down your attack, you'll unleash a stronger sweeping light attack. And just like the other classes, you can also sprint attack and jump attack as well. But the warrior's power attack lets you use the shield to bash the enemy over the face, or you can hold it down for a stunning blow, which does a lot of stagger damage to the enemies you hit with it. And again, it's even more effective against those yellow armored health bars. Also, the leaping shield bash just looks really epic. As for the shield itself, you can block all incoming attacks apart from the enemy's red charged attacks, which you'll have to dodge, unless you get an ability, which I'll talk about later. This really makes the warrior class easy to defend with, and it's possible to soak up damage while also buffing your allies and letting them take care of the enemies for you. Hilariously though, you can now throw your shield like a boomerang. You can charge it up and then yeet it into the foes. It even hits them on the way back as well, doing additional damage. And obviously this is very effective as a ranged attack against magically shielded foes. There's even a perk that lets you shield bash your own shield so it rebounds again and hits the enemies a third and then fourth time on the way back. And this is going to be staggering foes and applying debuffs to them. Now the next weapon you can swap to is the two-handed weapon. The light attacks cleave everything in front of you, doing area of effect damage, but it can also be held down while moving for a spinning attack like so. And all these core abilities and attack styles I'm showing you all get enhanced as you level up and skill out the warrior class. But if you want some real single target damage, you can start using the power attack. This is an overhead heavy single target damage attack that has big stagger and damage power. And again, you can also jump or sprint attack and even parry with the two-handed weapon as well. And while I don't think I mentioned it earlier, the shield can also parry attacks too. But just like the mage, you can swap between your warhammer and sword and shield, even mid attack combo. And even when you have the two-handed warhammer out, you can still use your ranged shield attack, but it's kind of like a spectral looking shield or frisbee that you throw into enemies. Before the warrior can actually use skills though, he needs to build rage in combat. And once he has enough rage, he can consume it to use some of his abilities. Others don't actually require any rage to use, and it's always good to have a combination on your skill bar. Now the warrior skill tree has 3 different specializations, and the rest of the tree is split up into survival, abilities, and weapons. Survival is obviously built around surviving, so defense and stunning enemies. There's a lot of ground-based attacks which will overwhelm foes, and moves like the Groundbreaker even deal fire damage too, while Bloody Advance will sunder enemy armor, making them more susceptible to damage. But the abilities skill section of the tree lets you create deadly ground underneath you, dealing necrotic damage to anything inside and debuffing them. Or the Bolt Walk boosts your defense by 50% and deals damage to anybody who attacks you. And finally, we have weapons. Here you can find skills that deal a lot of damage, raining down fiery blades from the sky with Fury of the Forge, or applying bleed to everything in front of you with cleaving, strike, or destroying or staggering everything around you with the Whirlwind skill. But once you reach level 20 with the warrior class, you unlock 3 class specializations: the Reaper, the Slayer, or the Champion. So starting out with the Reaper, who has a really unique playstyle, you can actually apply Siphon to enemies and then leech the enemy's health from them to heal yourself. They also gain bonus damage for the amount of health they lose in battle, and their ultimate lets them summon a Death Hurricane, which inflicts necrotic damage while also tagging everyone with Siphon. They also have a bunch of abilities that enhance their shield throwing skills as well, so if you want to play a Necromancer themed warrior and love tossing your shield, this is going to be the class specialization for you. Alternatively though, the Slayer specification gives you the ultimate two-handed weapon damage and enhances your ability to break the enemy's defenses. They have the highest physical damage ultimate in the game, where they pounce into the sky and land a crushing blow on their foes, staggering and weakening anyone caught in the area of effect. The abilities boost the damage of your two-handed weapon charger and overall damage, making them generate even more rage with each attack. And also, your rage will now heal you for every 20% that you spend on the different abilities, and power attacks are going to be even more lethal. Finally, we have the Champion specialization. This is a fire-themed warden, perfect for those who want to specialize in using the sword and shield. It turns you into an unstoppable bastion for your party. Using the Blightbane ability, you can weaken all the foes you hit, and then you can follow up with the class's ultimate to call down a hail of fire arrows from above, burning everyone that gets caught in a fiery onslaught. Now, most enemies in the game have those red glowing attacks that you must dodge. You can't block them. But if you're playing the Champion, he has an ability that allows him to unlock the ability to parry them with his shield. And also, when you parry normal attacks, you unleash fire damage around you as well. But now we must decide what the best faction is for your class. And you're probably wondering, just how much does this decision matter? So without spoiling anything, let me quickly break this down for you. There are 6 factions to pick from. Some of them do unlock unique dialogue options in the story and even give you an extra decision where there's one to be made. But it's really not game changing, and it's not going to gatekeep any of the story content from you. So just think of it as a nice roleplay flavor that you get to pick and actually does have some meaning in the gameplay. The next thing to note is that helping the faction you're a part of will boost your relationship with them faster when it comes to doing quests for them or just buying and selling gear to them. And story-wise, if you do help that faction, they might help you back later in the story. But again, you can do that with every faction. It just takes slightly longer if you don't. So don't make the choice based on those 2 things. The next thing to consider though is each faction gets a boost in damage against certain enemy types, like the Grey Warden do more damage against Darkspawn. And this is really nice to have on the harder difficulties, but it doesn't necessarily make one faction better than another. So why should you choose a specific faction? Well, beyond the backstory choice, which is there for flavor, you're going to want to pick the best faction based on this buff at the bottom here. Each buff actually synergizes with a different class really well, and some faction buffs are just better than others. So let's quickly go over them. Starting with the Grey Wardens, you get a boost to your base defense and health, which is going to help you on any class, but specifically the warrior. Next, the Veil Jumpers are going to deal more damage to critical and weak points, and that's going to be great on the rogue, who can headshot enemies for big weak spot damage. The Shadow Dragons, though, get a boost to class-specific resources. So for a mage that uses a lot of mana, this is going to be great, but it really just is useful on any class in the game. Next, we have the Lords of Fortune, which perform takedowns on enemies with slightly less effort. This is nice, but it's not gonna be game-changing as a feature, so I wouldn't really pick the class just for that. The Morn Watch can apply an additional affliction stack on targets. Now, this is really nice depending on what character build you're actually going to and how you're going to spec them, but I won't specifically pick it. And then finally, we have the Antivan Crows. These guys actually have hidden pouch, which just lets them hold an extra potion so they can heal more. Now, as I said before, the max level in Dragon Age Veilguard is level 50. The biggest XP boost though actually comes from just completing the quest and carrying on with the main story. The main quest gives you the most experience compared to the smaller side quests that still level you up, and you will of course get some XP from killing enemies enemies and exploring the world too, but in comparison, it's really minimal. If you want to level up fast, just play through the story. But leveling companions works a little bit differently. But companion quests are actually really important to be completing. Whenever you have an opportunity between missions, you'll be able to look at your local map and go and speak to the different companions, and that will strengthen your bond that you have between them. That's actually going to unlock new story elements, make other parts of the storyline easier without spoiling anything. But having those dialogue options and unique conversations is going to level up those characters faster. And obviously it's possible to romance every character. It's also possible for every character to die depending on your decisions. As you're playing, you'll also be finding lots of new equipment, from chests and merchants and so on. You'll find different armor sets that are going to enhance your character's abilities, and some are better for different classes. But the most important part to remember is that upgrading those equipment pieces actually happens when you find duplicate pieces. So if you find a particular armor set you like, you also see it in a store, buy it again, because it then boosts the equipment stats and unlocks new traits for it. I hope these tips and tricks help you enjoy Dragon Age the Veilguard, and I will see you guys in the next video. Please leave a like if you found it helpful.